Hey, we're just testing out the audio before everything goes live.
Hello, hello. Audio 1 2 1 2.
If you're in the room, hi, Lily. Could you let us know in the chat if you can hear us?
Yes, can you hear this? This
We
is
can
a
hear
plea
well
to
enough.
keep it up and to foster and share intellectual spaces. Sometimes
And then I will let you welcome in your guests. And at the end, you just press end here. Hey gang, first day tech issues. We're just rebooting. Give us a second. Jim,
very keen to be having this discussion with you about allyship and solidarity. This is very close to my work. This is one of the reasons why I'm organizing this teach out with Patricia. So nice to meet you. And my pronouns are she and her. Would you like to go?
Yeah. Do you mind if I take my mask out? It just breathing is something important as I speak, and I lose my breath a little bit. Here we are. We're live. Hello, everyone. So my name is Katusha Bento. I am a lecturer in Race and Economic Studies at the Department of Sociology. I'm also Associate Director of RACED, and right now the editor of the journal Identities. My work is about how to create communities and bridge solidarity in the global south and global north. And this is a project that I'm doing right now in Brazil with a community that we call Quilombos, a historical community of people fighting against racism and protecting Afro-Brazilian culture, religion, and practices. Yeah, and I also talk about affect and how that circulates around us. So it's really amazing to be here and having people interested in this topic, because I believe that also affects the structure that we are trying to fight against, that is oppressive, that is causing harm and so much inequality. That's why the context of this strike. But we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but this is in the context of my work.
Pronouns?
My pronouns, she, her.
Should we go around just so we know your names, pronouns, and if you want to say anything about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Stergios. I'm doing a PhD in sociology, and yeah, I'm researching issues related to displacement and refugee, everyday lives of refugees in Athens. I work around food practices, the connections with like accessibility and community building, and yeah, I'm like writing up. And I don't know, I was quite interested to this event because coming up from Greece in a completely different environment of activism and struggle with the state, I'm always seeing a bit the things that work here are a bit bizarre and a bit strange at times. So yeah, like see what that's about.
Thank you.
And pronouns are he.
Cool. Hello.
Hello, my name is Pietro Sparini. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a second year PhD student in politics. My research focuses on the relationship of settler colonialism and humanitarianism in Palestine. And I suppose I'm interested in this workshop, this event, just to learn more about the role of solidarity and activism within an academic university setting. Yeah, great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Becky. My pronouns are she and her. I'm doing a master's in international development. One of the courses I'm doing now is gender and development, which I feel like I'm learning a lot from, about intersectionality and decolonizing development. And we've had some recent workshops about it, and I'm just kind of learning so much, and I want to learn more, and I want to get more involved with activism and just see, yeah, what I can do and how I can kind of be more aware and all that stuff. So yeah, first time I've ever been to teach out, so I'm really excited to be involved.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
I'm Alex. My pronouns are also she, her. I'm an undergraduate sociology student, and I'm taking both the social life and faith course and the race and ethnicity course. The course is the basis I recognize you.
Nice. Yeah.
And I've been wanting to get involved more with the strikes and activism more generally for a long time, but I found it difficult to know how, and many things that feel like are holding me back. So it's great to be here and talking about these things and learn more about how we can establish solidarity and feel more comfortable within that too.
Great, welcome.
Hi, I'm Liv. My pronouns are she, her. I teach the food course. Totally excited to see people showing up from that. So I've got a background in interdisciplinary feminist studies. I work in the sociology department. I'm really interested in ecofeminism and feminist activism.
Hi, I'm Joan. My pronouns are she, her, although I'm quite happy with they, there, but that's on grammatical grounds. I'm a fellow in IASH at the moment, and I'm doing a project on how feminist stories travel and the feminist stories that are written out of the mainstream feminist story. So, yeah, hence part of my interest in being here today. So, thank you very much. Looking forward to this.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and online people as well. We won't have time to introduce everyone, with like being hybrid is a bit tricky sometimes. So are you happy to start?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that starting also requires somehow an acknowledgement of how working with what we are calling so far, and we're going to engage critically with that, the idea of allyship requires not only the intellectual work, not only the time that we dedicate in doing this, but the emotional labor, the psychological labor, understanding that sometimes it might trigger some of the traumas that in the ways that we navigate academia, because we are talking in this context about this context. And in any way that should be used or would be used to justify any reproduction of harm caused by us or any one of us. And it is also important to acknowledge that we are here in a context of a strike, in the third day of a strike, that more recently is putting an agenda the claim for equality from a different perspective, where anti-racism is more present in the everyday conversations, not only during the strike. So this is something that has been present in how we build conversations, and these conversations cannot start or stop only in the realm of, oh, let's talk about this, but in the practice. So it is important to acknowledge that this is part of what we are going to talk about.
Yeah. And just to start, we are using this book a lot. We're not being paid by Emma Tabiri, but
or the publishing house,
or anything like that. But we really like the critical analysis of allyship that it's in this book, which is also for sale here. And there is a fund for people who cannot afford. So if because of the strike or because of any reasons you're financially in a struggle, you can ask for Mary, and you can have this book for free, or you can pay £8 if you can afford it. So it's there if you want it. But this book, it brings a really interesting discussion about allyship and coalition, and the discussion around solidarity and privilege that is very pervasive on social media that you probably are aware of. And I think I'd like to start saying a little bit more about that, of what type of allyship are we talking about, and these ideas and these words that are very, used on social media in a way that became a caricature of social justice, of these discussions that we're taking very seriously here. So this idea of checker privilege that is sometimes spoken in a very kind of shallow way in terms of politics, of what does I mean by privilege? What is privilege in the society we're living in today? What is allyship? Or claiming an ally that you are an ally is already doing the work. That is this discursive activism against the action of actually being in solidarity. So we're trying to dismantle all of that and trying to think together of what we mean by allyship really. And instead of just getting rid of the word because it has been used a lot, we want to critically engage with it, which is different. So this idea of allyship, it's very much used in a way that is the opposite of victim. So it reinforces binaries of white superiority, many anti-racist discourses online, where you have an ally and you have the victim. And that is always in the sense of you're giving something, you're giving your privilege away, and that is building solidarity. So this is something that we want to challenge. This is something that we want to think about, of how this reinforces superiority of some people in regards to others, and this dualism that is very much present in many conversations, and including in social justice discourses that are trying to dismantle the very structures that end up being reinforced by this type of discourse. So this is something that we want to talk about here. And the idea of privilege as something that you have and that you can give away. What does that mean? What is privilege, really? And of solidarity as and being an ally as something that ends in an action, or something that you do, or something that you say, or how you position yourself. So we understand as an ongoing action that doesn't end with a speech or a tweet or just that. It's something that needs to be ongoing, and it's about staying with the trouble and the complexities that that brings. And we're gonna be talking a little bit more of that because we want to hear you as well, and we want to have a space of discussion here and seeing how it plays out when we are having the discussions, because it's very easy for us to just come here and say, this is what an allyship is, which we don't want to do that, because that's exactly the opposite what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We're not here to give you an ally badge. And then that's it. You can go home and you can wear it on the picket line and you're an ally. Like, we're not here to do that. We're here to build critical reflections together, and that entails asking questions. So that's what we're here for. Right?
And be self-reflexive about how our positionality in determined contexts and situations are inflicting power imbalances or being part of power imbalances. So because we are in the context of university, I brought a few pieces of data just to contextualize some of the inequality and how we are thinking about building solidarity, allyship, coalition, or any, I would even dare to say, a decolonial practice. But maybe that's another teach out, another topic. So I am going to read a little bit, but just bear with me, okay? So considering the intentionality to learn and understand, share and build solidarity when coming to this workshop, we invite you all to pay close attention to the context in which you are inserted. We invite you all to build possibilities of solidarity and create and hold space for othered knowledges. Be present in otherwise formats and experiences. And here I'm being very intentional in using the idea of living otherwise, performing power otherwise, with other wisdom, other knowledge, other ways of understanding and embodying the knowledge that we are sharing and we can build that might not exist. You know, we are daring to talk about allyship from a different perspective that we need to build together. The point is to invest in undoing normalized workings of oppressions, harm, exclusion, social justice. So Kirsty Dodson is a philosopher that I love so much, and she talks about epistemology of ignorance. So how this is perpetuated not only in the curriculum that we are delivering in every semester in and out, but epistemology of ignorance in the way that we dismiss some of the issues, or we dismiss the emotional laden that is to put together or a curriculum or reading list, or having students coming to our office because of our particular way to carry ourselves. In my case, I'm a Black Brazilian woman, and particularly students coming into my office to cry and say, I don't feel like I fit in. How is that an articulation of a work and the weight that it has in terms of race, gender, and nationality? I am not saying this to add some of the ideas of identifications. I am saying this because this plays very important roles in the power dynamics that we're in. So again, it's not about identities, it's about power, okay? So this epistemology of ignorance is something that dismisses the importance of discussing these topics, of understanding how this is reflecting on the gender, race, disability, equality gap that we are having and we are talking about. But bringing these experiences are very important for us to illustrate the situation. So here I want just to give a snapshot of what the situation is or how it looks like. I, as a professor, as a lecturer, a professor, bad translation from Portuguese. Everyone is a teacher in terms of professorship, and we don't have that. As a lecturer of race and decolonial studies, I look at race topics, but we could translate this to different kind of oppressions, harm, exclusion. But here I got the 2019-2020 Higher Education Statistics Agency that said that 21,000 academic staff at professorial level are nowadays in British academia, okay? I will repeat, 21,000 at professorial level. 140 identify as Black. So when we contextualize the setting, the British Sociological Association in 2020, Remy Salisbury, Claire Alexander, among the colleagues, wrote this report, which I think it's very important, in a more narrowed way, talking about race and ethnicity in British sociology. So among many areas of study, sociology is the second most searched for people of color to study. So this is a very important subject in terms of how higher education are absorbing people of color, okay? So we're talking about the majority of people of color that are present in higher education are in sociology, economy, and then sociology. So when we talk about this gap, when we talk about racial gap, we're not talking only about the staff or academics. We are talking about the entire pipeline that takes higher education students to this professorial level, right? All the way. So it starts with the awarding that racially minoritized students, notably, and here I quote, notably for Black, African, and Pakistani students, and are less awarded less. So they get a 2-2, usually lower marks. Despite Black African students being the largest proportion of all racially minoritized groups, taking sociology in 2018-2019, they experience the most unequal outcomes in their degrees. Just 51% achieve a first or 2-1, compared with 79.4% of white students, an award gap of 26%, more than 26%. When we talk about this pipeline, so disproportionately, people of color, specifically Black people, start diminishing their presence as we talk about postgraduate talk programs and postgraduate research programs. There is a significant representation of Black, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi British academics. Racially minoritized women comprise 88.5% of total number of staff, and people of color, men of color, racially minoritized men comprise 5.8%. So I'm just bringing this data just to show that it's not only the gap in the income or the increase of fees for students that is like a filter to exclude minoritized groups. But so it is the entire system of structure that we are talking about, the fees, we are talking about awarding, we are talking about the contracts that have become more and more precarious, and we are talking about then, of course, salary, contracts, and how people get promoted. So I will stop here just to talk about that this is also linked with epistemology of ignorance, as we ignore the process that is not only talking about racial inequality, we're talking about the gender inequality and all the things that intersect with those issues. We have to take a direction. Why is my curriculum white? Why isn't my professor Black? Are not only asking for people of color in the curriculum. Why isn't my professor Black is not only asking the institutions to hire Black people. We are talking about a systemic inequality in which we need to build allyship, coalition, but for me, the best word is solidarity, in order to change the systems and not accepting the normalized oppressions that we've been dealing with. And as Audre Lorde, we're going to end with this, but I wanted to say this here because I think it says, your silence is not going to protect you. Being quiet about this, not doing anything about this, allows to perpetuate that inequality that we're talking about. So how can we take action? Let's go back and just talk about what it means to be an ally, what it means allyship.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good. So I have a little exercise to do with you. And since we don't have a lot of space, we're going to have to improvise. We're gonna read a quote from the book that defines what an ally is. And we want you to position yourselves with your bodies. This is an embodied practice. If you strongly agree or strongly disagree. For people on Zoom, you can type numbers 1 to 5 according to strongly disagree and strongly agree. So if you strongly agree, that's 5. If you strongly disagree, that's 1. And if you are somewhere in between, you make the math. And people who are here, we're going to ask you to stand up and stand up in front of your chair if you agree, and stand up behind the chair if you disagree. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you're going to sit, because we need to keep the 1 meter or whatever, like 5 centimeters for COVID precautions. So I'm going to read the quote. You see if you agree or not, and you position yourselves and you type your number. And then we're going to ask you, whoever wants to speak, of why you agree or disagree. And then we're going to continue the conversation. Okay? Any questions? Yeah. Okay. So let me go to page. I can read it here. I prefer the book. Okay. I'm attached to the book. Okay, so page 22. An ally is someone from a non-marginalized group who uses their privilege to advocate for a marginalized group. They transfer the benefits of their privilege to those who lack it. So this is the quote. Do I need to read again? Is that good?
Can you read it again?
Yes. An ally is someone from a non-marginalized group who uses their privilege to advocate for a marginalized group. They transfer the benefits of their privilege to those who lack it. So non-marginalized is an ally. An ally is non-marginalized who advocates for marginalized, transferring the benefits of their privilege to those who lack it. So please stand up.
If you agree.
If you agree, in front. If you disagree, in the back of the chair. And if it's neither, just stay sit. Can we check the group chat?
Yes. We don't have. Oh, 1. Julie said 1.
Okay, so strongly disagree. Okay. And you are neither. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Does anyone would like to share why they strongly disagree? Yeah.
It just sounds like the person who's the ally has this power where they can just give it, and they've got this like control over it. It just doesn't sound very equal at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought as well, what turned me off a bit was the advocating for the other group, which kind of reproduced the power imbalance with this, not on an equal level of allyship.
What word would you use instead?
With,
Okay, advocating with.
yeah,
Okay.
as a core
Mhm.
resistor.
Okay. Yeah, we're problematizing the words here, so
Yeah,
we're trying to be. That's great.
But yeah, advocate with
Mhm.
rather than for.
Mhm.
Um,
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Anyone else?
I was thinking in terms of the like marginalized, non-marginalized distinction, but that's also quite problematic.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have people supporting each other who experience different or interlinked sorts of oppressions. So just making it seem that black and white does really make a lot of sense, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important. Anyone else would like to say anything? What made you be sick? Can I ask?
Yeah, I guess from like an observational perspective, I can see that sometimes people like to use a privilege to show solidarity, like especially in direct action, like when if you're a marginalized person, you can't thinking here from asylum seekers, they can't engage like sometimes in protests. So those of us who have the privilege of going to the protest, because if we get arrested, we are not getting deported. So our we can use our privilege in some ways. So some sort of allies or advocate. But then on the same time, apart from the problematics everyone has mentioned, I think we also see the other dynamic of sometimes the unprivileged using their positionality to support the privileged. And so again, from my experience, like for example, seeing asylum seekers or refugees in Greece, for example, participating in demonstrations that are about working conditions in Greece, or not okay, what conditions might be affecting them, like issues that are not directly affecting them, or they can, but they show the solidarity with the local population, who is actually in a much better position than them. So yeah, it was. I guess I was going towards the back, but for some reason I sitting down.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. At some point, I'd like to go back to this idea of privilege that you mentioned.
But I think you are addressing to something interesting in relation to the complexities of our positionality. Although it might be a little bit dangerous to just talk about the privileged and unprivileged, as there is a duality or a binary that is not intertwined, right? So
by the way,
yeah,
can I just stop for a second? If you want to sit.
Yeah, please.
I forgot to say that before.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone who participated, for Judy.
And Julie, thank you.
If you want to say something on the chat, Julie, feel free to do so. Otherwise, it's fine. Or anyone else.
Yeah, we are watching the chat. So if you want to make comments or ask questions about what we've been discussing, please intervene.
You're talking about privilege and
and how that is not a duality. So for me, I had to read this phrase a few times. I was like, this is not. It doesn't feel right, right? It doesn't feel right. And yeah, this negotiation with language is also very important. What we are doing for, or like having or reproducing the patronizing or colonial understanding that we need to save, that we need to give, that we need to invent something, that we need to discover. I miss, as I said, yay to anyone who never discovered anything. yay to anyone who didn't invent anything, because he's just addressing to the idea of how the power imbalances is so put or associated with that epistemology of ignorance, in which only one group of people can invent, only one group of people can discover. And when we negotiate a simple, word for or with, or how we position this and analyze someone from non-marginalized group, we put things into perspective. Even the language or negotiation of the language of people seeking asylum or asylum seekers. How do we position even the people we're trying to build solidarity with in relation to a crystallized position, right? That it can only happen if it's in that way.
Yeah, and I very important, I think, is that how we're going to call the people as asylum seekers, just as the status that they're trying to achieve, which is, I think, is quite problematic. But also the idea of privilege. So is privilege is going to the streets and protest and not go to jail or deported because of that. Is that a privilege? So that's something that I think we should think about. Is it going to a shop and not being followed by the security guard a privilege?
Yeah.
Is that like basic human right a privilege, basically? So I think this is something that we need to think of, like when we think, oh, I have the privilege of not being arrested or not being stopped by the police because of my skin color. But is that what we're talking about when we talk about privilege?
Apart from anything else, I think that assumption just is that kind of power relations are static. I mean, we might imagine that we've got privilege if kind of that's such a thing. But
sorry,
I'm sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. Can you take a seat, please?
Yeah, but power dynamics shift and change. I mean, so the kind of laws being kind of put in about protest and stuff, that might be kind of something that we consider to be a human right might be taken away. So yes, I think that language is just kind of static as well.
Mm.
Yeah. That's a problem, and I think we have to understand how we situate our own positionalities according to the context. I will be a little bit repetitive about this, especially addressing to the intersectional element of how harm can be reproduced, but also like we are not so far away from that possibility. I think there is something else related to allyship that you actually pointed out here in terms of not leading that duality.
Yeah, I think something you said about marginalized versus non-marginalized is something that I want to go back. How do we define as similarly to this idea of what is privilege, what is not privilege? What is a marginalized group and what is a non-marginalized group? When we address kind of the intersectionality of the issues that we face as individuals, society. So this idea that there is a marginalized and there's non-marginalized. So there is, because of your skin color, you can afford some sort of privilege and give it to someone. So even if there was this separation of marginalized and non-marginalized, what is the nature of the privilege that you're going? How is it something that you possess that you can give away? So I think this thinking is very interesting for us. And about the duality, I think what I want to say, and please let me know if that's what you think, is that there is very often in this idea of being an ally. Are you here for the? Yeah, please.
Yeah,
No, that's okay. There's often in this dynamic of being an ally, this rhetoric of doing the work, of doing the work or being a good person, doing good. And this not only reinforces the superiority and inferiority dualism, but also comes with it a sense of martyrdom, of you are doing as an individual your part, which is very difficult when we think about coalition as something that is about finding shared interests and building solidarity and building new systems together, or dismantling systems that we want gone. So this martyrdom, it's very interesting because we should think about what is behind is why, if you think you're in a superior position or a privileged position and you want to give something, why would you give something away that puts you in a power position? So there is a power dynamic and a power relationship in that feeling of superiority, which is precisely the internal work of whiteness that Du Bois speaks about. There is this thing that is very hard to give away, because it is about your identity of who you are, even if you don't perceive it, because whiteness is often invisible. But it's about this idea of power, and it's about this idea of doing good, or of improvement, self-improvement, that's very much connected to a lot of moralities that we want to dismantle as well.
I want to educate myself.
I'm doing the work. I'm reading all the Google Drive books that people shared after George Floyd's assassination. I'm doing the reading. I'm engaging in debates on social media. I'm a great ally. So it's this idea that if that's enough, that having the conversation, which is something that we're doing here, it's this, performative allyship. And this, it generates this feeling of doing good. And it's very dangerous, because it's very easy to stop there. And it's again reinforcing not only the binary, but also the idea of what ally is, in this kind of destroying this. So why would people be martyrs? It's something that we want to interrogate. Why is that? What is the intention behind the allyship and coalition building? Because coalition is about finding shared interests and working together. So what often happens in these debates as well is that people think that positioning themselves, they are doing that work of being critical as well. So if I position myself as a white Latina, and then I start to, and queer, and I start to speak as that already is a given, that you understand where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to say here, is already like doing the critical work of thinking about intersectionality, for example. And what we want to think is that it's not about intersectionality of identities, it's about intersectionality of issues. So I think this discourse on allyship and identities is very much atomized sometimes. It becomes about who you are and what and
how many privileges you can pile up and some at the end.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Participate. So, this intersections, and this idea that intersectionality is this summing up addition of the keywords that will define you, and that's it. It's very problematic, and it's, again, depolitizing intersectionality, which is a very powerful, concept. Not only concept, but praxis as well of Black families. So this is, I was very happy that most people disagree. But I was also wanted to find out how people would argue if they agreed. And because it's very easy to agree, I think. I'm helping out, and this is the dynamic of like, I'm doing my work, I'm helping out, I have the best intention. So it's very hard to be critical of that positionality, because it's doing good. So this is what, like, it's not about like, shaming people or pointing the finger or whatever, because this is another dynamic that we want to talk about, that Elder Lord brings to us, of the dualism between anger and guilt as well, of anger and guilt as incomplete forms of knowledge. Because with anger, even though it ignites action and can be very useful for political movements, it doesn't do the work of coalition building by itself. And guilt is a paralyzing emotion that often leaves people feeling paralyzed and feeling that they don't have anything to do, because they, feel sorry for themselves or feel like they've done bad. And it's very much in this kind of Christian moralities again, of improvement, of, civilizing missions and civilizing in self-improvement and doing good again. So this too, it's like, again, following those dynamics that we don't want to be trapped again, but thinking about going beyond in what this building coalition actually means.
Yeah, especially when we talk, just going back to the example of why is my curriculum white, because many universities took it on. Let's let's check our curriculum. Okay, that's great. But there is, as we watch the process of neoliberalization of universities, especially in the British context, we also watch how these issues are taking, like in terms of, oh my God, we are out of guilt, and trying to compensate some of the mistakes or the historical oppressions that we are trying to address from a very tokenist practice. So this is still not being sustained by a transformational change, but only a superficial understanding that, well, let's dress twice, my curriculum white, maybe launch one program, maybe hire one or two Black professors. This is not what this is about. We need to change. So back to Audre Lorde, one of my favorites. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. This phrase is very often misunderstood. I'm not going to break it down every single word. I would love to, but maybe another teach out. We're having a lot of ideas. But it is about, even when we have other people of color, racially minoritized groups, from, with disability, dissident, gender, sexuality, presence. This is not what this is about. It is not about not having or having white people, but if we are going to reproduce the master's tools, the master's house, whoever enters in that environment will end up helping building the master's house instead of dismantling it. So using the same tools, like changing the curriculum, using the same tools as hiring people, is not the idea. The idea is to change the perspective and where you're coming from. If it's out of guilt, if it's out of anger, this might not be so helpful to mobilize the change that we need in order to create that solidarity, in order to create change. Because ultimately, it's not just like creating solidarity, making a circle and saying the kumbaya. It is about change. It is about the next step, what we are going to do. And this idea of epistemological ignorance, as we go, or as we say that we are going against this grain of this idea, is also commodified, right? Over, like, how many people are talking about the decolonial right now? How many people are talking about, oh my God, my curriculum is super cool. But in the everyday practice, they are still dealing with students of color who are unawarded. But in the everyday practice, they are not building solidarity with their colleagues in the department. They actually don't know even their names. So how we can be alert to this important change in order to create an environment that is not going to be sustained anymore, because we are no longer using the master's tools. Yeah.
I think we're almost running out of time, but I'd like to give an opportunity for anyone who'd like to speak or ask a question or say anything about what we just said or about the exercise. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Or share an experience about
allyship.
About navigating in academia, whether you feel excluded or whether you feel like, oh, that was a successful experience of allyship.
I just have a question, which is whether the university is redeemable. That's probably it's probably where I'm at.
That's a good question.
I think rhetorical, but
As my second year being with the university last year, being quite online, but I suppose the most interesting was that's not successful, but productive or generative allyship, I think I found was within the UCU working groups that we've worked on solidarity with. Well, I usually focus most of my work on Palestine, but found that space where there's, you know, just students, staff, is very, very open. With a space where we could come as just not even students or staff, but just together working for this bigger issue. And related to what you were talking about, the curriculum and the use of decolonial language, and how, just a thought in terms of how universities can appropriate this decolonial language while continuing to support materially through investments or through other links, actual colonizing and imperial projects.
And also just sucking money out of other countries through overseas students, you know, just like, you know,
Yeah.
we'll still continue to take stuff from you as well.
Yeah, this is not something that we wanted to talk about, like bringing back again the discussion to academia, right? Like as a way of thinking of redeemed or not redeemed, as a space where it's not a public space of higher education where people come for free to study. And it's been not like that for a long time, but it was always a colonial space. It was always a project of colonialism. It's not something that, there's not a happy path of public universities, you know, giving knowledge for free. There's not that. It was always a colonial project. And now, because it has been more and more privatized and becoming more and more an investment fund more than anything else, that has to do a lot with the powers and the colonial power dynamics as well, and also increased precarity of students in poverty and debt and staff in uncertain and temporary contracts, like myself. Thinking about, you know, why are we doing this here? Why are we still insisting in doing a teach out and inviting you to think about this? I think the answer is pretty clear, that it's, even though it's very problematic, it's not something that is new. It's not something that, you know, has never been there, was never thought before. So it is, I think, like building solidarity and insisting in building allyship and solidarity and coalition is the only way to go, basically, if I'm trying to think about this.
Yeah.
What does it mean to not do the work?
And engage critically with these ideas of allyship, right? The meaning of that. So we disagree with the concept that we shared here. What are we agreeing with? What is the commonality that is moving us to define allyship? Because so often, as I mentioned before, it has been commodified and it has been, I don't know, kidnapped or appropriated by grassroots activists, people who are suffering and trying to voice that kind of oppression into what they are calling the decolonial, right? The Black Lives Matter solidarity, or even the unconscious bias trainings that they have in these institutions. We're solving the problem. And how come the problem is still here? And how come we're striking? And one of the claims is that one. So it's not solving the problem. So solidarity has not been built in a way that is actually transforming something. And we're going to have to deal with the contradictions of being and working in a capitalist institution and trying to tackle that in our everyday practice. And the day we don't do that intentionally, it is possible that we reproduce some of those things that we are criticizing, right? The day that we are not intentional on how we build allyship, how we build solidarity, how we are anti-racist, anti-transphobic, anti-isms on an everyday basis, we will have these problems on a daily basis. And we are also accountable. So Patricia Hill Collins is talking about ethics of caring. not as, you know, the form that we have to submit for the ethics to do research or to do a project in the university. Everyone here might, especially Neve, knows about that. But she's talking about the everyday ethics of caring, in which you care and you also take accountability for the actions. It goes beyond that health and safety follow-up. It goes beyond that idea of, you know, just a methodological piece. It is the parts that we are intentionally doing the work on an everyday basis. Do you have any questions?
I think there is a comment I can see from the distance. Can you open here so I can read it?
Oh my God, how can you see that?
I don't know, I have good eyes.
Julie's saying, you want to read? She's leaving. I'm soaking. Okay. Sorry, I keep losing sound. I'm still struck by fitting in and how little we would know, I'm sorry, if it's happening and the risks of this. Gabby's point about relationship between feeling good and doing good rings so true. Thank you, Julie, for sharing this. I don't think we would know if it's happening and how it's happening. I think we would know what we are doing in order to make the students or to involve the students into our teaching and learning practice. And yeah, and also because taking into consideration that when we don't do this and when our colleagues don't do this, it is very probable that if the student asks for help or needs to cry, they will cry with people they feel they feel closer to. As a Black woman, I can say that. As a migrant, I can say that. I can say that my students who don't speak English as a first language, I can say that my Black students come to me when they feel like they don't fit in. So the lack of intentional work in solidarity of my peers are affecting the labor that I have with my students. And this labor, I will do it. I'm here for this. But if we bridge a consistent solidarity, I believe that we can change the format in which our students are feeling like they are fitting in, right? Understanding that they are going to have different ways of writing or thinking, of expressing their thoughts and their knowledge. And that can also be valid not only in the formats that we have, like British introduction, development, and conclusion.
Katucha,
yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm struggling to keep the connection. I was so struck by those words, fitting in, because I think it's a very pervasive way of framing both student and staff experience in a university, is this idea of fitting in, and yet it's a long way away from what you're describing as solidaristic practices between staff and students. And I was just struck by it that students and staff will often talk about this idea of what it feels like to fit in, and at an everyday micro level, the ways in which people are left not fitting in or feeling that they don't fit in would be an interesting, almost away from the labeling of allyship or solidaristic or what works best in terms of language, just as a way of trying to get students and staff to talk about this idea of what it means to fit in. I just found it a very powerful way that you started the session by talking about the student who had come to you and used this expression, because I think it's I think it's one we have all used, but obviously in from different positions. And it was just, you just struck me immediately with that term.
Yeah, I think it's also important to explain that term in terms of how a student comes and use those words. It is about how they are not feeling involved or part of the teaching learning process, in which why is my curriculum white is not the university talking about decolonization is not being enough. Yeah. So it's to address the contradictions of the environment that we are in, and think about how we can. It's not to redeem the responsibility, the accountability of the university. It's the opposite, but it's to also acknowledge that there are contradictions in that space. Oh, please come. We're gonna wrap up in a few minutes.
Yeah,
We're a little bit over.
we started late, so
Thank you, Julie.
yeah, I want to reply to what Julie said about the feel good versus do good, and that's not really opposite, but because I think I missed, like I would like to say a little bit more. I just want to end this kind of discussion with this quote, and then we can end for real.
Okay.
So the tropes about white saviorship, that I think it's important. As a framework, it all focuses I'm gonna read now, starting now. As a framework, it all focuses far too much on the good behavior of individuals. The best we might hope to achieve through this type of approach is the reform of a system that is unattainable, reform that can only ever be piecemeal and contingent, a fragile safety, a truth unratified by the silent majority, dependent on the charitable but often fickle and self-serving intentions of liberal sensibilities. We need to shift the focus away from the good individual and their personal privilege, moving the emphasis from focusing on racist actions to challenging racist systems. So I think this also speaks to what you're saying, that even though we are challenging the university, it's not just how it plays out in terms of, it's systems. Yeah. And the systems are present in relationships and personal connections, in how we talk to people and how to try to build relationships. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do.
Shirley Tate and Paul Bagley wrote about the idea of the next steps towards a decolonial university, if that's possible. And she ends the article saying, well, we need to be intentional and attentive because whiteness is going to be present. She's addressing to whiteness and she's conceptualizing whiteness, in case you would like to get to know a little bit more of the theoretical framework in which they are coming from. But whiteness and this colonial power is going to still to be there while we do this decolonial work. So we need to understand how to navigate this, and be present. And this is like towards the next step. The next step is in parallel, right? We are not from one day to another going to destroy and demolish whiteness and white supremacy and all the coloniality of power. We're doing this. Let's flourish, hopefully, together towards this understanding of allyship in a more intentional way. Do you have more questions or comments? I don't want you to feel rushed to finish. I know that we are over time, but I know that it's a lot to take in as well, like how we are digesting this topic.
Very shortly, I just thought it was really interesting how to learn, or just how you talked about problematizing the feeling of guilt in this context, because it can see how it really reproduces this individual response to our problems when really we can't exit these systems, these oppressive systems individually, and you cannot relate as a collective through this emotional guilt that leads to what the last quote you were saying, to just practices of charity, or to donate, to feel good personally. And it's not really an emotion that's very productive to a collective. So to building a collective structure to dismantle these oppressive systems.
Yeah, I think it can be a jumping off point though, can't it? When you just when you have an aha moment, you think, shit, how long was I able to not think about that thing? So if if you can move on from that, then potentially it's a helpful disruptor, as long as you don't just like sit in it, and which that's the nature of paralysis. Kind of sometimes you are left there, but if you can move out of it, I think it's not necessarily completely unhelpful if it's a kind of a eureka moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Last month we had Tatiana Nascimento. She is a Brazilian poet for our Race Sad series, and she writes about the power of whiteness in everyday situations. And she says, take the white guilt to therapy, meaning don't make people who are being oppressed the target to, oh, but I didn't know better. Oh, but to justify something. And then also the emotional labor relies on people who are not really needing to deal with that feeling of guilt. And how we can move on from that, get out from, because guilt can also be the comfort zone of, epistemology of ignorance, right? And then there we stay, because that's where we've been staying for centuries. And that's how we learn and how we teach and how we reproduce that in practice.
Oh, what can I do? The systems are just impossible to.
Oh, the system.
It's just, I'm just part of it, right? So I'm just gonna sit here and be part of it because I cannot do anything.
Yeah, the institutions are out there, right? I'm just working.
Yeah,
I just need
just a victim.
Yeah. I just would like to finish acknowledging the fact that we organized and we thought about this, framing from and drawing from Black feminist theories, especially Black women. So we had Emma Dabiri.
I don't know, I'm pronouncing it as Portuguese.
Dabiri, yeah, Dabiri. Catherine McTrick, if you know about this book, Dear Science, she's so badass, and I'm using this word like that. She made a playlist on Spotify so you can listen to the songs as you read the book. I'm just saying, I'm also not getting in. Audre Lorde, as always. And this classic, amazing, all the women are white, all the Blacks are men, but some of us are brave. Black Women's Studies. This is one of the best titles you're ever gonna come across. So it could be nice to have close to your pillow. But we are going to wrap it up with the words, with the thinking, with the emotional labor of Soraya Nayak. Thank you for everything that she shared with us through her publications and her activism. And she is concluding one of her pieces on activism and academia, in which she says, she just like her conclusions is almost like bullet points. So what to think about, how to be aware of things and of the social injustice that is present. So I'm going to share with you, and maybe it's something to feel and to continue thinking about this as we continue this strike, as we continue this conversation. Because the conversation cannot stop, of course, but we cannot stop in the conversations. Put that into practice intentionally. Be alert to power, privilege, and position. The how, method used, and the what, objectives of solidarity are interlinked. Connections, building bridges, and collective working are vital. Be hypervigilant of every kind of borders, ideological, geographical, historical, material, and emotional, because borders create fragmentation and fear. Borders are detrimental to social justice. Taking care of ourselves and each other is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. O dear Lord and the Hooks. Oppressions are complex. While navigating isms, exclusion, prejudice, pain, oppression, harm, or even the harm that you also suffered and is being represented through trauma, you don't get to justify causing harm because you feel harm. Do you want to continue?
Yes. Your silence will not protect you, Elder Lord. Intersectionality is crucial because, open quote, the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, close quote. Always think and act on the basis that all oppressions are inextricably interlinked and interdependent. Almost perfectly pronounced that word. Anyways, last quote. Instead of resorting to simplistic solutions, stay within inevitable, irresolvable complexities, as this will provoke creative, productive thinking and action.
I hope you take this home and you go safe and reflexive about this takeout. I think that Surya Nayak is giving to us so generously. I stayed for about 5 minutes to get to pronounce the word inextricably. And I think
it is difficult.
And it's amazing because it is. It is interlinked and interdependent. Mm-hmm. So unavoidable links about oppressions. So that was the inner joke about people who don't speak English as the first language. So thank you all so much for being here and staying until a little bit after 12. Yeah. If you need this, this text, Surya Nayak, Audre Lorde, but some of us are brave. We can send to DCU this bibliography, so you can have added on the Eventbrite, and you can check on your own time and also interest.
Also, for those who come later, we were using definitions of allyship from this book, which is on sale here in this library, in this bookshop. And also there's a fund for people who cannot afford books. So if you're struggling financially, you can ask. There is in the wall, there is some explanation of how it works if you want to know more. But basically, if you're struggling, you can get it for free. And there are extra copies for this event. So if you want, this is a very good book, I think, for explaining all of that. So thank you very much for coming. We're gonna wrap up here and hopefully organizing more events soon. Thank you very much, guys.
I'm saying thank you for everyone, Julie, for participating in the online on this workshop, and yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. And it will be on YouTube. So it is on the Lighthouse YouTube streaming right now, and it will be there. So if you want to send to someone or watch, it's there. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Julia Glick, your final points, Katushin Gabi. Thanks for reading to us.
It's cold, right? Yeah. I'm from the south, near Argentina. She's from São Paulo.
Bye, Julie.
Bye, Julie. Thanks for coming.